Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the 10th in a series of noon lectures sponsored by the Associated Student Speakers Program. Following today's talk, we have two mics set up on either side of the room, and if you'd like to ask questions, just step to the mics and we will alternate for the question and answer period. Today's speaker, our guest to campus, has spent all of his adult life in the defense of Israel. He has moved up in the last 27 years from underground fighter to commander of the Israeli Defense Forces and commander of the Israeli Army during the Six-Day War. And it's my honor and pleasure to introduce the ambassador to the United States from Israel, Major General Yitzhak Rabin.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad to be here to talk to you. I'll try, of course, to talk about the problems facing Israel on the background of what exists today there. I wouldn't allot much of my time to hypothetical questions or to the long historical background that part of the world has got. I'll deal mainly with the problems that facing Israel today and in the future. I think everybody who really wants to solve problem has to tackle what exists and what might happen rather than to deal with long argument about the past. Second, I'll talk as an Israeli. I'm an Israeli. I'm not pretending to be objective. I don't believe that there is objectiveness when it comes to international affairs. And whenever somebody tries to put the image of being objective, I at least begin to become suspicious. I also have to apologize. My English is not perfect. I was born there, raised there, spent all my life there, and the only year that I spent outside my country was when I sent about 16 years ago to attend the British Army Staff College at Camberley, but there I was busy with all kind of minor problems like the British regiment seniority, and it didn't leave enough time to learn English. But I learned one thing there, that whenever you have to talk, it's better to start with a story. And I hope that you haven't yet heard this story, because it was a very famous story that came out as a result of the Six-Day War, among many others. And the story tells about a gathering in heavens in which three famous military leaders of the past participated. There were the Hannibal, Genghis Khan, and Napoleon. And they discussed the Israeli military victory in the Six-Day War. Hannibal said, well, had I had the Israeli tanks, I would have taken Rome in a matter of days. Genghis Khan said, well, had I had the Israeli Air Force, I would have taken Europe in a matter of weeks. Napoleon didn't say anything. After a certain amount of hesitancy, he said, well, had I had the voice of Cairo, Radio Cairo, till now, no one would have known that I lost my battle in Waterloo. Well, at the beginning, it was a nice story. But the more time passes, it looks that Napoleon was right. The Middle East is a quite confused area, and it's very difficult to follow exactly what is going on there. And when time passes, matters have become more confused, And I think one of the things that have contributed to the confusion is the fact that in the last 3 wars that we fought there, always the aggressor lost the war, and the part that didn't want the war, the defenders, won it. And sometimes it also causes certain confusion. Because it's not, you have to remember that it doesn't change the fact if the aggressor loses the war, that he was the aggressor. And if the defender wins the war, that he didn't want the peace. I would try to answer certain questions in my talk today. The first one is it possible to achieve peace in the Middle East? I would like to start by saying that I do believe that peace is the most needed in the Middle East. I believe that once peace would be achieved, and the countries and the peoples of that part of the world would direct their efforts, their resources, to the real problems that exist in that part of the world, to fight against ignorance, to fight against poverty, and really to cooperate in the development of this part of the world. This is what the Middle East really needs. The second question about peace, about the possibility of peace, when one talks about peace, peace between whom? What kind of peace? When we talk, the Israelis, about peace, is peace between the countries that exist there today. It's a peace between Israel and the Arab countries. It's peace on the assumption that Israel would survive, would continue to exist, as well as the other Arab countries that exist there today. I would say that in this question lies the source of all evils. Because the basic problem today and the cause of all troubles is that the Arabs still maintain the idea that Israel doesn't exist. And because of their refusal to accept the fact that Israel exists, there is no any advance, political advance, in that part of the world. Sometimes we ourselves wonder how so many countries can hate, can fight, and always losing against somebody who doesn't exist. But it's part of the logics or the lack of logics in the Middle East. When we talk about peace, we have also to define what does it mean, peace. I must admit, before I came over, or it's better to say, before I started to become a diplomat, I thought that peace is a simple thing. When you have got good relations with your friends, you try to cooperate, or at least you don't fight each other. This is the meaning of peace. When I came over here, I have learned that there are many forms, many definitions of peace, and many kinds of peace exist over the globe. Therefore, when somebody talks about peace, it's better to define what does it mean peace, at least in regard to the problem which he is tackling. Therefore, I think for us, for Israel, the meaning of peace must include at least 3 elements. The first one is recognition, specific recognition of Israel and its boundaries, the boundaries that would be agreed on between Israel and its neighbors. The second element, reconciliation with the existence of Israel. And third, open boundaries. Boundaries that once peace would be achieved, or peace settlement would be achieved, they would be open for exchange of views, exchange of ideas, traveling of people, and commercial purposes. Because without these three elements, it's not a peace. It's just using the word peace by wrong interpretation. If you will try to find out who really wants peace in that part of the world and who doesn't want, you can examine it by two ways. The first one is to try to look back to the past. In 1947, the United Nations decided, after the British handed back their mandate over Palestine, about a partition of Palestine, to have two independent states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. We accepted. The Arab countries did not accept. It's not only they did not accept, they tried on the day when the British left Palestine, by the total force of the 7 Arab countries' armed forces, to destroy us. 7 Arab countries invaded Palestine on 15th of May 1948, the day that the British mandate terminated. They tried their best, but their best was very little. And they failed, they were defeated. Since then, there was another war in 56 and another war in 67. They lost in all these wars. None of them was initiated by us. We didn't want none of them. And just is clear evidence who was involved in who initiated these wars. There is another way to find out who wants peace. If you follow what is going on there, every Israeli leader has declared time and again in the last 21 years that we want peace. If you have heard any Arab leader that has said that he is ready for peace, please let me know. I haven't heard it. Therefore, today, Israel's position is, this time we are not going to accept any solution short of a real peace. Peace which would be negotiated, agreed on between us and the Arab countries. Peace which will create and bring about a change in the interrelations between Israel and the Arab countries. We say to the Arab countries, we are ready to talk peace to you anytime and any place. I'm very afraid to use this term, but believe me, we are ready to go to Cairo, we are ready to go wherever to negotiate peace, wherever they want to negotiate peace. I would say we prefer Cairo to the United Nations. But if you don't want peace, it is to say you want to pursue the policy of war, we are not going to give back even 1 inch of the territories under our control. Because why to hand it over? These areas that now under our control served in the past as the springboards for your offensives, for your aggression. Why to give it back? By not having them to you, you wouldn't be able to carry out any future aggression effectively. Therefore, the choice is before you. You want peace? We can have it. We could have it 21 years ago. We could have it since then. We can have it today. But if you don't want war, you don't want peace, we are going to maintain the present status quo for indefinite time. I would like to add something else. This time, we are not going to accept any substitute to peace. Because we have tested, we have experienced, we have witnessed all kinds of substitutes to peace. In 1949, we signed armistice agreements under the chairmanship of the United Nations. And in the preamble to this armistice agreement, it is written, and any and every of our four neighbors signed on it. And it is written there that this armistice agreement should be a prelude to a permanent peace in the Middle East. Nothing happened. In 1950, three big powers, the United States, Britain and France, gave a guarantee to the borders of the Middle East. By now, no one remembers that such a guarantee was given. After 1956, the Suez War, two phenomena were created by so-called efforts to maintain peace. The United Nations sent emergency force, the United Nations Emergency Force, 5,000 soldiers with the emblem of the United Nations, by the power of the United Nations. They were there, and once Nasser decided to get rid of them, in 2 days the United Nations Emergency Force melted away. Then we had another phenomenon. 13 maritime powers gave a guarantee and declared it in the United Nations. The United States, Britain, France, Italy, Scandinavian countries, and many others. When Nasser decided in the second half of May to block the Strait of Tiran, well, no one of them, of these 13 maritime powers, moved their finger to fulfill and to carry out their guarantee. I think by our acts, we saved a lot of the prestige of these countries. Had we waited to them to open the straits, till now, we would have waited, I would say. Therefore, I think it's quite logic and simple that the Middle East once will have peace. Peace in which every country will entertain the right to live free of threat of use of force within its own recognized boundaries. I'm afraid that I can't bring good news to you. I'm not very optimistic about the prospects of achieving peace in the near future, for two main reasons. I don't believe that Egypt or the ruler of Egypt wants peace. And he has got his own reasons that derives from his ambitions to take over the Middle East. And Israel serves as a barrier between Egypt and the other Arab countries. But more than that, he has found a great support in one of the superpowers, in the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union has decided to take over the Middle East. For them, it's one of the most critical areas in their struggle for sphere of influence with the United States. It's the bridge between three continents. 2/3 of the known oil reserves are found there. The economy of Europe and Japan depends on the oil of the Middle East, and the power that will be there, Europe and Japan and industrial parts of the Far East, will live at its mercy. And after all, one of the most important struggle is about the influence in Europe. And I have only to repeat what once Churchill said about the Mediterranean in the Second World War, that this is the soft belly of Europe. And therefore, the Middle East is a real and a great prize to the Soviet Union. And the only way that the Soviet Union can advance its interest in that part of the world is by maintaining tension. Once peace would be achieved, the Soviet Union would not be in a position to advance its interests, to extend its influence, and to deepen its penetration. And if you look back for the last 14 years, you'll see that only because of tension, the Soviet Union gained in that part of the world. And the Soviet Union doesn't interest in bringing peace to the Middle East. When they talk about political solution, it's a political solution in which the Arab countries will retrieve all that they have lost, but short of paying for it in peace. Therefore, I'm not very optimistic about peace in the near future. Israel will try its best to explore every avenue, to try to find out every solution, not to save any effort to bring about peace. But after all, we have to live and we have to face realities. Therefore, the second question is, in the absence of peace, is it possible to prevent another war? As a matter of fact, when I talk about war, I mean a big one in the Middle East, between the powers of the countries of the Middle East. Because a small war is going on every day. The small war, the guerrilla, the commando, whatever name, doesn't make any difference to us. The war that the Arab countries or certain organizations are trying to carry out with the hope that by the burden created by this kind of war, Israel would be forced to change its mind, to wait till a peace would be achieved. Well, I'm not going to deliberate too much about this war, but if somebody thinks that by this kind of warfare he would bring about a change in Israel's mind, he has got a big illusion. He miscalculates completely in thinking that way. It's a burden. It's not too heavy burden from the overall point of view, and Israel will manage to eliminate the effects and the damages caused by this kind of war, as we have done in the last year. Today, the amount of damage that is caused by this kind of war is much less than it used to be a year ago. The second question, of course, is it possible to prevent another war? I think that the answer is yes, even though we have learned that our logic is not the Arab logic, and not always their deeds comes as a result of even their own logic. This is the Middle East. And I believe, therefore, logically, that it's possible to prevent another war. If Israel will be strong enough militarily, because now our lines of defense are the best that one can draw on the map of the Middle East for the defense of Israel. The Suez Canal zone, it's a nice ditch. It's quite an obstacle. And to cross it, it really requires quite high efficiency, and it's a very complicated operation. I would say even more than that. The present line along the Suez Canal is shortened in mileage than it used to be on the 4th of June. Even though the area under our control is bigger, the lines for practical military purposes have become shortened and based, well, one cannot call the Suez Canal natural obstacle, but it's, as I said, an obstacle. Vis-à-vis Jordan, the border was shortened by 1/4. Now it's 1/4 than it used to be before the 4th of June between the Dead Sea and the Lake of Galilee. The Jordan River, it's very big in the Bible, but unfortunately is very small in reality. But still, it's an obstacle, and no problem. I would say that today, after the Six-Day War, we are entirely confident that Israel alone, for the foreseeable future, can withstand the total military force of the Arab countries. I know that we are 2.5 million and there are 60, 80, I don't know exactly, but it doesn't change if it's 70 or 80 millions. We have got the people who know to fight, they know what for they are fighting, and they have proved themselves. Therefore, I'm entirely confident. Doesn't matter if the Arab will understand that there is no hope in war, but if they would try, there is no hope for them. The only limiting factor in our military strength is hardware. We can more than multiple Israel military strengths just by changing the kind of tanks and planes or by having more. This is the limiting factor. I believe that the stronger Israel will be, the less are the possibilities that the Arabs would dare to attack her. I would say it depends very much to what extent the free world opinion would be against war. Therefore, I believe that it's possible to prevent or at least to postpone the renewal of the war, but I'm entirely confident that if they would try again, it would be another defeat. And after all, what we are interested is not to win wars, but rather to prevent them. The third question that basically is facing Israel, in the absence of peace, living under the shadow of a possibility of another war, would it be possible to Israel to continue its development, the economic, the social, the educational, the scientific, the industrial development of Israel? After all, the purpose of the creation of Israel was not to build armed forces, not to have wars, even not to win them. The purpose was to try to create a modern Jewish state in our ancient homeland, which would serve as a model for a democratic and a progressive society in that part of the world. We have achieved a lot in the last 20 years, even without peace. Even we had to fight 3 wars. I believe, I would say I more than believe, that Israel not only would stay there forever, but it would be possible, even though peace would not be achieved, even though we have to live again under the shadow of war, it would be possible to continue our development and to serve as the only democratic country as we are today in that part of the world. We know that it's a long way. We know it's a hard way till really peace would be achieved. But if we'll do what we can do, I am sure that these days of peace and understanding in the long run would come to the Middle East. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, General Rabin, and thank you very much. If you do have any questions, we have mics on either side of the rooms. If you'll step up to the mic, you can ask your question, and we'll be glad to answer it. And if there are no questions, thank you very much. Okay, then, General will be glad to answer the one question.
I want to ask how the General feels that the Arabs were the aggressors in 1956 and in the Six-Day War, when the documentary evidence has shown that there was a collusion between Israel, Britain, and France to attack Egypt with the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company.
I didn't follow you. What did you say? What did you ask?
You stated that Egypt was actually the aggressor in 1956 and also in the Six-Day War. I have found in my own research, and as many people who in the area know, that Egypt was not the aggressor in 56, and that Egypt was not the aggressor in the Six-Day War. As you said in your own statement, I'll quote you, if we had waited for Egypt to open the Tiran Straits, it would still be closed. Now this is your own statement. It states that Egypt would have not opened it. I agree, they would not. But Egypt took it upon itself, which is a legal question, to close it because it is within Egyptian waters.
All right. Can I answer you now? Well, depends what do you call to start a war. To my opinion, to start a war is to present act of war by expulsion of the United Nations Emergency Force, by putting embargo against the decision of the world community. It's act of war. And today, this is the question. To my opinion, and I think I haven't got here the book, I would like to quote the late President of the United States, J.F. Kennedy, when he presented against the missiles, during the Cuban missile crisis, when he said in the modern times, the question is not who is opening the first shot, but who creates the first act of war. And the first act of war was created in '67 by Egypt.
The Tiran Straits, though, is part of the Egyptian territorial water. This is purely a national question. This is a legal question, I will agree with you. But within national waters, if you will look and know how much room there is in the straits, legally within 6 miles of the country, that is national water, and this can be closed. I don't agree with the action myself. I think it was rather insane, personally. But it is a legal question. And I do not see how you can say...
Well, act of war is also a legal question.
Okay, but it is national waters. If we wanted to close national waters in the United States, we could do that too. and then Mexico, say, could declare war on us.
Well, I understand that you. No, let him talk. Why? I think that we have got a difference of opinion. I understand it. But I don't believe that many people, objective people, would agree with you that the closing of the Strait of Tiran was not an act of war.
That's your opinion, but I do not see how you can determine Egypt was still not the aggressor.
Not asking a question anymore.
All right.
I mean, anybody, they were aggressors. They'd be up
I understand your point of view. I don't accept it. And I think you are wrong. It's very easy to live here and to state it.
Sir, you stated that in your belief, in order to have peace in the Middle East, Israel has to have a military superiority, has to be fairly strong militarily. And then
I said to prevent a war, we should have it.
All right.
I said for peace, we have to get the agreement of the Arab countries to accept Israel as fact.
But in your statement, you said that in order to do so, Israel must be strong so they won't be attacked by the Arab nations, right? Correct? So my question is this: that first of all, you stated that the only variable in this maintenance of Israel's military strength was the amount of weapons they had. And my question is what kind of part the United States plays in the amount of weapons, because I heard right now that there's a negotiation going on for American airplanes. And I was wondering about the negotiations and about how this will affect the amount of...
We are in the negotiation of purchasing certain amount of planes here. We don't turn to the United States for all our requirements. We have got other sources of supply.
Thank you.
I guess over here. Is this one working? Yeah, one thing to clear up what was said about what this gentleman just said. You have the right of innocent passage through territorial waters, and traditionally a blockade or an embargo has been considered an act of war. But that's just to qualify that. The question I have, you said that Israel has diminished the effects of these terrorist activities. How do you reconcile that with the bombing last week where 11 people were killed and these terrorist incidents seem to be increasing?
Well, we know that we will have to pay for it by damage and by life. But since we haven't got any other alternatives, we'll survive it.
But you foresee curtailing the amount of damage that's done?
Oh, well, there are some, we are losing people from time to time, but the economic damage is not very high.
My point is essentially if you increase the violence as it has been increasing, eventually you reach a point where the whole country would, or it would reach the point where things would stop functioning. In other words, can this be reversed?
Well, I don't believe. I think one of the difficulties here, when somebody talks about guerrilla warfare, everybody sees Vietnam. There is no similarity whatsoever. We are in full control of all the territories. I would say that in the last months, practically, 80% of the infiltrators are caught, and there is improvement in the prevention of infiltration. Within the territories under our control, we have no problems of traveling or going. There is no interruption whatsoever in the working. Even, for example, every day there are hundreds of lorries, trucks, that cross the West Bank to the East Bank and vice versa. It doesn't work only within the territories under our control. There is free movement between the West Bank and Jordan, of goods at least.
Mr. Rabin, I'd like to ask you about the delicate problem of the increasing Arab population in Israel. I realize that it's a big dilemma in Israel, that the Arab population is increasing ever more, and it's defeating the purpose of the Jewish state, in that there'll be more Arabs than Jews in Israel. What is being done by the Israeli government on that score?
Well, first, there is no increase in the population of the Arabs in Israel. There is increase, of course, they grow, and but the growth of the Jewish population is much higher. In Israel today, there are little bit more than 300,000 non-Jewish and about 2.5 million, 2.35 millions Jews. The political status of the territories under our control has not been yet decided. What will be the political solution for them, it depends very much if the other side would like to have peace. We don't say that we are going to stay where we are once peace would be achieved.
Doesn't the problem become much larger when they open up kibbutzes around Syria, the Golan Heights, and other places?
Well, in the Golan Heights today, there are 8,000 Druzes and Circassians. That's all. But still, the Golan Heights political future is negotiable.
Thank you.
General Rabin, do you think that it would be to Israel's advantage to develop a nuclear weapons capability? In particular, do you think that this would be a way of putting effective pressure on the Arabs to come to terms by holding out the potential threat of mass destruction? Or do you think that it would merely provoke a response in kind, either from the Arabs themselves or from the Soviet Union?
It's a hypothetical question because Israel policy is not to be the first to introduce nuclear weapon to the Middle East, and therefore it's a hypothetical question.
That'll have to be the end of the questions. Thank you very much, and thank you.